Hi, everybody. My name's Kimberly Maize, and I am a trauma resolution expert. I am the creator of the trauma response syndrome model and a previous clinical social worker turned trauma revolutionary. I am proud to introduce my daughter and co host, Savannah Woodard.
Thanks, Mom. I'm Savannah, a second generation trauma specialist, a trauma informed coach, and care advocate, and together we are a new generation.
We are a mother daughter powerhouse duo determined to decrease the stigma of trauma and bring focus to healing transgenerational trauma through open conversations.
Please listen as we share our story on how we healed transgenerational trauma through radical self awareness and responsibility.
Because remember, when families heal,
Society heals.
thank you.
Thank you. Wow. I can't believe that we're here. This is so wild. I'm Savannah, like I said, trauma specialist, and this is my mom, Kimberly, and we're here to talk a little bit about transgenerational trauma and how we healed. And I can't believe that we're actually here.
I can't either. I mean, after the very traumatic journey that we've had for multiple generations, but now coming together as a mother daughter who's actually done the work and worked through our trauma based and trauma bonding. It's amazing. I can't wait for people to hear how we've worked through this so that other people and families can find some resolution too.
Yeah, and if we can do it, then you guys can definitely do
Yeah, I
it.
mean, we've
We've been
really
through it.
we've been through it.
And so we're going to share our story with all of you.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I do want to just introduce my mother here as a expert in trauma resolution, and
Thank you.
because of that, I do want to ask you, in your opinion, what is transgenerational trauma and how is it passed down through families?
Well, the field of studying transgenerational trauma is just getting bigger and bigger every day. The research on epigenetics and how trauma is literally passed down through our on a cellular level in our DNA that we're carrying memories from ancestors back and back, and how those behaviors of our ancestors and their traumas can show up in our lives is just really
Mind blowing.
mind blowing. And that field will just grow exponentially. And with that, the implications of what that means on understanding trauma and trauma motivated behaviors
Right.
and what's going on with people when sometimes their behaviors or what's going on with them just doesn't kind of make sense. If they're having extra experiences that don't seem to belong to them. I mean, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. But for specifically for our podcast and our story and listening listeners, we focus on the way that trauma motivates behaviors and impacts parenting and children, and how to find some resolution for those dynamics. And with our story, we have broken down our trauma and trauma responses so deeply that I hope it makes an impact on the people that are listening to what our healing journey has been.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, transgenerational trauma is the trauma passed down through generations and doesn't find any resolution. So it's acted out, and parents impact their children with their trauma. So we're just going to dive deep. We're just going to get started on these very difficult but much needed conversations that we have been able to have because of the resolution that we have found. And because of that, we're able to help and teach others. So let's just get started. How do you feel like my not getting my needs met as a child impacted my ability to parent you and get your needs met?
Well, I think there's many answers to that, but the first thing I want to talk about is how deeply I was impacted by the lack of my own mother's parenting.
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of how children learn and how they become humans and learn how to become humans is through learned behavior, watching their parents do the same thing consistently over and over and over again. And to say the least, neither one of our childhoods were very consistent.
Right.
And so I feel like the lack of consistency in my mother's childhood led to the lack of consistency in my childhood, which then for some time led to inconsistency in my own parenting. And luckily, I've been blessed enough to be able to work through some of that with my kids and heal that. And obviously, we've healed that in our relationship too. But it took quite some time for us to know how to relate to one another, function with
Years.
one another.
Mhm.
At first, it was due to more trauma response, and we were reacting because of our lack of resolve.
Mhm.
And now, over the years, we've become much more mindful of how we relate to one another and how we react and respond. And, I think our
Yeah.
communication has greatly improved over time. Um, I feel like a lot of that has to do with us being aware of what roles we maintain for a long time. And we'll
Yeah.
talk more about that later. We're not really talking about roles too much today, but I do want to touch on my caretaker role. And I know a lot of people relate to this. I've seen my clients, my friends, people on social media, that people don't know how to let their parents or their family members be their own people, and we're all kind of working towards wanting a specific outcome. We want specific parents, we want specific relationships, and it leads to us not being able to radically accept who our parents really are. And that's where my caretaking came in, was that I was constantly trying to get a certain outcome of my mom's behavior. And because she was so traumatized, so inconsistent and unstable, quite frankly, that led to me always trying to figure out how to fix the situation,
Mhm.
control the situation, and
Mhm.
kind of predetermine what was happening before it was happening because I felt unsafe. That was the only way I felt like I could really determine safety,
Right.
was if I knew exactly what was happening next. Now, as an adult, I can say, well, it doesn't really matter what I do or what I say or how I act. I can't really determine the outcome of someone else's behavior because their trauma is motivating their own behavior.
Right.
And I think that's how we've come so far, is that we're really mindful, obviously, of how trauma motivates our behavior, but also realizing that the other person has the right to have their own experience, do their own healing, do their own thing. And that doesn't mean that our relationship has to be tumultuous or uncomfortable. It's just we have to be able to meet each other where we are and love each other for who we are. And then we evolved, right? Over
Right.
time, we're
Right.
able to evolve.
Well, and I think that we've taken responsibility for our own part in how we came together, and we're not enmeshed anymore. We're not getting our needs met through enmeshment.
Which is a great point. And I feel like that was a big part of my problem growing up, was that I felt so responsible because we were enmeshed. I felt so responsible for your emotions,
Mhm.
your mental well-being, which led to me not looking at myself, well, not getting my needs met in childhood because you were the one that was supposed to
Mhm.
be taking care of me and getting
Yeah.
my needs met, supposed to be.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had to kind of follow suit and do my own thing and make sure that I was safe. And then being so intuitive, so sensitive, I also felt like I had to keep you safe.
Right.
And I no longer feel that. My mom can keep herself safe. And my inner child knows that, and the grown me knows that. But for a long time, I was so disconnected from that little Savannah. She was constantly rescuing and controlling and doing all of these behaviors that made my mom uncomfortable, especially as she got better through trauma healing, which we'll talk a little bit more about
Mhm.
that. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to talk about. What do you think was the catalyst, the biggest catalyst to really change our relationship dynamic?
Well, I definitely have to say that it was when my psychiatrist, Dr. James Trahan, became trauma informed in 2003 and gave me a trauma informed diagnosis, which was dissociative identity disorder.
I was 12.
Yeah. Um, and even though that was still a diagnosis at that time, it saved my life. It literally changed my entire perspective on my experiences. And this doctor actually apologized to me later on and said, "I'm sorry that I diagnosed you as bipolar and psychotic. You were never any of those things. You were extremely traumatized." And those words literally saved my life. And once I began seeing myself as a traumatized person rather than a mentally ill person, I was that saved my life. I know that that's not the case for everyone. Some people are very safe with their diagnoses and identifying as mentally ill. I was not, and still am not. And so, because I wasn't mentally ill, I was traumatized. And
Right.
things got much worse before they got better, as they always do, because you were taken away and you were removed from my care and things like that, and we'll talk more about that later. But I now had a purpose for healing, and I literally began to consume every information that I could possibly get on trauma, which back then there was not much. I mean, Bessel van der Kolk had only just started his trauma research. The ACEs weren't even, published yet, those kinds of things. So,
Wild.
yeah, it was a journey of discovery and self-discovery that, but with that being said, I was still DID for a long time
Mhm,
after that diagnosis,
mhm.
and really struggled. And so then you were then, uh, when you returned home, because you did return home, because I did get well enough to have you return home.
A miracle,
Yeah, it was. I'm surprised that either one of us survived
that
those
situation.
years. Yeah. So that's what I think the catalyst was.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like so much changed after that. I feel like our whole world changed. Everything about how we functioned and who we were and what we had believed for so long. It's amazing how one appointment can make such a difference for a person. One diagnosis, one medication, it's really phenomenal that for the good or the bad, depending on the
Mhm.
person, right? And for us, what we really needed was a trauma diagnosis because of the extent of our trauma.
Well, and literally, and I can say this now, is that I got that diagnosis in a psychiatric hospital, and this was when I was 33 years old. So this was the first time I was hospitalized was I was 13. So that was 20 something years of chronic suicidal ideation. And I had made the decision that that was the last time I was going to be hospitalized. I was going to end my life.
Right.
And I had given up. I was done. I thought you'd be better off without me, and I was done. And so when I was going to be released from that hospital, I was going to take my life. So it makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Dr. Trahan was
Yeah.
just so,
It's making me emotional too.
yeah.
So we're going to try not to cry this entire time because this is, um, it really is a miraculous story. And
Yeah.
once you hear more and more of our story, you're going to really understand why we're so emotional because the fact that we're both standing here alive, sober, happy,
Yeah.
all of these things,
Sober,
like
happy.
really cool. So
Yeah.
I'm so proud of us.
Yeah. Me too. Amazing.
Really amazing.
So now that we've pulled ourselves together a little bit, I want to ask you how you feel that the dissociative identity disorder diagnosis changed our dynamic.
Well, like my mom said earlier, it got a little worse before it got better. I feel like just that shift in the way that you were, the way that she viewed herself, the way that you presented yourself, the way that I mean, everything about her changed. Everything about you changed. And so, and
In a
you,
year. It
in a
took a year.
year,
Yeah.
yeah. And she's my center, my mom. I was a kid. And so that automatically made me change just inherently because of the way I was parented changed, the food we ate changed, where we lived, the way we related to one another. And I feel like for the first time in my life, I didn't have to be the parent.
Mhm.
I had always been the parent, I had always been parentified, and I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was a 12-year-old kid. I was 13 just a couple months later, and I had just come back home from being removed from the home. And so it went from this utter trauma, what I saw to get you hospitalized,
Yeah, that is, yeah.
and then very extreme living circumstances with my dad's side of the family, very different from how I was raised. Although I visited them in summers and such, they were very different foundationally, just very different people than what I had been raised in.
Yeah.
So just the stark, transitions from going from one thing to that, to then going back home to a mom that was so different now compared to, I'd seen her try to take her life, trigger warning. And so that really was impactful of like, whoa, she was that bad off when I left. And now she's this person when I came back. It was shocking. I had my own room for the first time. I don't know in my life, but definitely the first time that I had ever had a really nice, well done. She had done the whole house and the whole room and my favorite colors and all of these things. She never had the space to do that for me before. Not that you didn't do things like that, but it was such a huge shock. Just that in itself. Not to mention all the learning that came over the years of when you start doing trauma work like this and really looking at how trauma motivates your behaviors, one learning moment affects everything in your life because it's all about who you are. It's all about your sense of self and your sense of security and who you are as a person. So anyway, I'm rambling, but it was just such a phenomenal thing to come home and be like, wow, I'm seen and I have a room and I matter to my mom. And I remember that was a good thing, but it was different than what I was used to. So it seemed like a bad thing. So I was nervous, I was scared, I was distrusting of it, and I didn't know how to handle those feelings along with being 13 and in middle school and dealing with dating and sexuality and gender identity and all of these things, trying to figure out who I was and what mattered to me. And so I started rebelling. I didn't know what to do.
Big time.
I started acting out, I was basically like, screw you, mom, you can't take care of me. You've never taken care of me before. So
Little late
in the game, which led to substance abuse. It led to crime. It led to violence. It led to self-harm. And it was really extreme. And my mom was still battling DID and was doing the best that she could. Didn't really have a lot of support from our family just because of the trauma. And a lot of pain came from that. It was really interesting though, just a year or two later, I feel like you tried to let me sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place, but for a couple years, I feel like you really tried to let me do my thing and tried to give me independence and trust me and know that I was a good kid. But I was reacting and rebelling so intensely that after a couple years of substance abuse and crime and not really getting my own act together, my mom felt like she kind of had to do something extreme. And honestly, sending me to treatment was one of the most impactful things that has ever happened to me. That diagnosis led to me going to treatment. And although I was only 14 when I went to treatment, my mom showed me that she cared, which was huge.
Which was different than I got.
Which was way different. That was I think that was one of the very first steps of healing our transgenerational trauma.
Absolutely.
Of, even though this isn't normal to me, normal to my mom, I'm still going to do this for my daughter because I know that's what you wanted, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I should have gotten as a teenager.
And I want to do better. Right?
Yeah.
And I know so many of us out there are like, I want to do better and I don't know how. And that's why we're talking about this, because honestly, I think you wanted to do better the whole time.
Of course.
It was just she couldn't. And then once you got the DID diagnosis, it was an opportunity to do better. Right? And so she sent me to treatment, and it was a intensive outpatient. I went every day, Monday through Friday, or even Saturday, all day, like 9 to 5 or something like that. And so I ate meals there. I was with these kids, and just my mom showing me that I mattered and that she cared. And what I learned at that treatment facility changed me forever. It showed me that I had value, that I was worth more than dying an addict or dying in jail. And that's where I was going. No, it's hard to imagine now, but that's where I was headed. And it was such a phenomenal thing. And I think that that was hard for our family. I'm pretty sure that grandma even told you that you shouldn't put me in treatment because that's not what our family does.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us a little more about that, because that's wild.
Yeah. I was raised very much in the idea of we have family secrets and we take care of family no matter what, and we hide things and we lie to the police. And, you know, if crimes are committed or drugs are done or those kinds of things, mostly deny it, pretend it's not happening. And there isn't, there wasn't ever a, the behaviors that are going on are damaging to anyone, especially
Right.
children.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I grew up very much believing that you don't call social services ever. Even if you don't call child protection services, you don't call the police, you lie to the police, you cover up crimes to the police. Since I was 5 years old, I was taught to do that. And so when my daughter, because just a little caveat to this is that during this time I was homeless. And you know, like I said, just because the diagnosis came and things changed, that didn't mean that I wasn't DID anymore. And so a lot of things happened at that time. And I was homeless, and Savannah went to go live at my mom and dad's house temporarily. And they didn't have space for me, and that was not really a safe place for me, and it wasn't really a safe place for her, but it was
Better than
a
homeless.
place. And
Yeah.
so I would come there at night occasionally and sleep on the floor in the room that she had. And one time she was walking up the stairs as I was walking down, and she was stumbling drunk, and alcohol fell out of her shirt, a bottle. And I was like, no, we're done. We're done. And the funny part of this is that you had already been on probation from school, and had a tracker, and this stuff was going on. And I'm the one who had to call her probation officer and say, my daughter needs to be put in treatment. Nobody was doing anything. And
And I think that's my privilege for sure. Looking
yeah,
back, I feel like being a
absolutely.
pretty
White.
kind white
Oh,
girl,
100%.
I definitely, I mean, I'm a 2-time felon and it was expunged because I was a minor, but I should have been put into jail.
And that same probation officer was my brother's probation officer, who got the equal treatment
Because we're good
because
kids.
he's good kids. That's what I heard. Oh,
Which we were, but
they're just good kids. And I'm just like, it doesn't matter if they're good kids.
still need
They
boundaries.
need their, and I didn't have the resources or the understanding of how to parent those behaviors out of her, because I also had those behaviors.
Right.
And I didn't know anything other than what I didn't get. Because I didn't go, nobody paid any attention to my substance use or anything that was happening to me. And so I felt like I need to do the opposite of what I got.
Right.
And so I said treatment. And my mother was definitely not supportive of me sending her to treatment. I was told, you know, that's not what we do as a family. She didn't have an alternative of what we do as a family. We don't tell people our secrets, and we don't acknowledge things face to face that are happening. Like, this is going to lead to some really dangerous behavior down the road, and we need to do something about it. It was just like, well, let's pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, and I'm now realizing, I've never realized this until now. So this is the benefit of having difficult conversations. This is not an easy conversation.
Right.
But I'm now realizing I think that's part of why I rebelled so bad. Because my grandparents were condoning underage drinking
Oh,
and all sorts
absolutely.
of things. And so my norm that I was seeing all the time, and majority of my norm, was going against what my mom said.
Mhm.
And because it was so different, I was upset with you rather than those who had traumatized me my whole life, because that was my norm. So it's really interesting to think, well, I was like, screw you, I'm not going to do what you do. I'm going to go drink with my grandparents. And that's what I
Because
did. I went and used drugs and drank with my grandpa. I moved out of your house that she eventually got. Lots of ups and downs and
different.
homes and all sorts of things. But eventually, when I was close to being an adult, I lived with my grandpa and we just partied. And I
Yeah.
think a big part of that was because I wasn't ready to do
No.
the work that my mom had done. I mean, I was still a kid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a big reason why I chose and went back to normal for a while, and I was actually quite mean and,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, a lot of things to her, even though you were doing the right thing. It just wasn't what I was used to, so it felt scary and wrong, and it was easier to party.
Right. Well, yeah, and at that time and for many years, was the first time I started validating you. When you started coming home, when you came home after being removed, that is when I started validating you. And I was, very much understood, not to the extent that I understand now, but I understood to some degree at that time that I had traumatized you, not fully because I was still dissociative and all of those things, but um telling you, you need to get angry at me. You need to get angry. You have the right to be as angry as you need to be for as long as you need to be. And you weren't quite ready to do that work of, you just got angry and stayed angry.
Which I think is really important for us to talk about, those of you that are watching or listening, is that this was a very long
Yeah.
process of
Yes.
me being ready, or me not being ready, mom then not being ready, I was ready, I
Yeah.
wasn't ready. And then finally,
Years.
after years and years and years of doing a little work here, a little work here, separation, work, separation, we're finally able to say, okay, we're both ready to really do the deep work. And I know it's really difficult for parents out there. I'm a parent and I'm a child, obviously. And it's hard to hear when our kids are upset, or even when our parents are upset with us, and being able to say, you know what, I want to hear your perspective
Mhm.
even if I don't agree with it. There's plenty of things that we disagree on. We think very differently in many ways, but we've learned to really respect and love each other, and both just be ready to hold space and also be radically responsible for our own behavior. And obviously, at that time, I was still a child. And
Right.
so neither one of us expected that. But now, as an adult, I'm 32. I'm really able to say, okay, now I see why I wasn't ready and why that happened and why we are where we are now. And that's why we're talking about it, because such a long process and we finally made it through. And we want to encourage all of you that this is a tedious process, it's a difficult process, but it's so doable.
Well, and that's the thing, is keep watching or listening, is because we break down all the things that we had to do to get to this point as a parent, understanding what parents, how to approach our own trauma and find resolution within ourselves so that we can hold space differently for our children and stop trying to get those needs met that don't belong to our children and aren't our children, and we're not being triggered by our children, because parenting is triggering. When you have unresolved trauma, everything's triggering just about. And so and we had to do something very, very radical to get to this point. We haven't just been like, oh, let's work this out. Not at all.
And we'll talk
And
about
we'll
that.
talk about the divide later on. But
Yeah.
um
So now that we've shared so much of us, we've shared a lot of deep, dark things already. I feel like we should do a little bit of a lighter introduction. Do you want to share a little bit of who you are and what you're about?
Sure. Other than a fierce trauma resolution warrior, because that's the foundation of who I am, obviously.
And me too.
Yeah. And I am a previous clinical social worker turned trauma revolutionary, as I have said in the introduction to our podcast. I worked in all kinds of different areas as a clinical social worker, in the correctional facilities, treatment facilities, trauma, you know, lead trauma therapists, therapists to all kinds of different populations, because my life experiences did motivate my behaviors without even being conscious of it. Over and over and over again, I hear people, especially that I've worked with, is that I want to help people. And I was more driven by my intellect allowed me to intellectually bypass my trauma. That was it. There was no conscious decision if I want to do something, because the level of my dissociation, there was no conscious decisions made at all. And I went to school because it was easy and I could fall apart inside. But it's a, you know, I dropped out of school in 8th grade and was able to go to college when I got pregnant and had a reason to live. So, um, but it's interesting to think how I was motivated by learning about human behavior long before I even understood why. I wanted to understand why people do what they do, um, long before I understood why that mattered to me. And so that's why I studied psychology and religious theory. And then I wanted to keep going to school because it was easy. So my professor said, well, you can get a license being a social worker long before you can get one being a psychologist. So I was a single mom. So I did what, and I'd like to say that, everything was great as a social worker, but I literally don't remember anything about going to that 2 years of college.
Oh.
So, but I do believe that I was motivated on a subconscious level to do what I was doing because of the work that I was meant to do. And I do believe that. And that's why it's so critical that people who work with people impacted by trauma do their inner work before anything else. Number one, you are your first client. So, I'm also a Nana, which is the most important thing, and a dog mom, and an artist and jewelry maker and all kinds of other hobbies that I'm able to do now. And I'm a mom. So, what about you?
Well, I'm also a mom. Obviously, if you're a Nana.
Yeah.
Yes, I have 3 children, and they're the light of my life. I feel like they're a big part of why I am who I am, and I felt really determined due to the impact that I saw in trauma-informed care, how that affected our relationship. It really, yeah, just I can barely even put it to words how inspiring and just beautiful it's really been to see our relationship over the years, and how I've seen the way my mom relates to me, how that affects me, her tone, the way she talks to me. And it's really brought a lot of awareness of how I can be a more conscious parent. And that's why I'm motivated to do this podcast, future generations, of our own generations, but also all of you and all of your kids. It's really important to me um, that we raise awareness on how trauma impacts sense of self and our sense of security and our confidence. So that's been a big part of my driving force. I was a stay-at-home mom for many years, and now I'm back in the workforce. And yeah, I work as a trauma specialist. I do direct care with many people, and that work is so profound. I'm a trauma specialist under my mom's model, the trauma response syndrome model. And it is the missing link in trauma care. I can say that pretty confidently. And I'm also a trauma-informed coach through Moving the Human Spirit. And I have that title in order to do a little bit of more lighter trauma-informed care for people who need coaching but don't feel like they necessarily need years of trauma resolution work, which, to be honest, most people who come for coaching eventually ask for trauma resolution work. So start there.
Good for them.
Because yeah, you have to be able to do your own inner work and really understand how trauma motivates your behavior in order to know how that trauma motivated behavior shows up in your office, or when you're working with clients, or when they're texting you in crisis or whatever. You have to know how to handle those things. And if you're not grounded and secure and resolved in yourself, you can't do those things. So that's why I'm such a strong advocate for trauma-informed care. I think it's really important. I have another company. It's a sister company to the companies that we own, Badge of Honor program, where I talk all about creating systemic change and helping people who want to work within the system become more trauma-informed.
Yep.
And I'm also a trauma-informed yoga teacher and a Reiki master. Something about me is from a very young age, I've known that I was meant to heal, and that was part of my purpose. And I've always been really motivated and inspired by alternative medicine and all of those things. So for many years, I considered myself the director of alternative medicine. So if you see that floating around the internet, I now have geared myself towards the trauma component rather than the alternative medicine, because it's that vital to me and my healing. Although yoga and breath work is crucial for healing, to most people, it is not the most important in my eyes, which I know might be kind of extreme for some people, but yeah, so that's me. And I'm a mom and I'm a wife and I love my family. And I'm just so happy to be able to be here with my mom, be able to talk all this through and how far we've come. And I think that's it. Is there anything else about myself I should share? I don't know.
We are raising the first generation of securely attached children in our family system.
Wow. It's pretty amazing.
That's number one.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to kind of conclude with is that we are hoping to share our story and help parents and children understand kind of the things that can be done to start the process of opening these conversations with your own families. Now, I want to make something very clear is that we understand that there are some families that you just can have no contact with, me included. There are some family members I've not had contact with for 25 years. And that is the truth. But just cutting off toxic people does not leave room for any kind of healing for families who are open and willing. And you'd be surprised. When we come at it as a non-shame based approach, which is what we have through the trauma response syndrome model and also One Planet Healing, the organization that we've co-founded. So I think that's children, even adult children, need to focus on themselves first, solely to come to a place of resolution, and then think about what kind of ways to open it up to extended family. But we do want to offer some insights and ways that you can heal and work through resolution in yourselves and therefore with the parent or a family system. That's the goal. And sharing our story and what we've accomplished. So
pretty cool.
Yeah.
I hope that you all enjoyed the episode today, and we really appreciate you lasting this long and sticking through with all of our shenanigans. And next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about more of what we talked about. We'll dive deeper, but we'll also start introducing roles and how they affect your family system. So stay tuned. We launch every Wednesday, so we hope to see you then. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.